I recently finished rewatching Better Call Saul all the way through for the third time, and much like every other time I've watched it, I was left absolutely blown away. I found myself somehow even more emotionally affected on this most recent rewatch than my previous times watching the series. It's such a rewarding show to rewatch with the context of the bigger picture, both as its own series and how it fits into the larger Breaking Bad universe. Besides Twin Peaks: The Return, Better Call Saul is probably my second favourite show of all time. I just have such a deep love for the care and detail that goes into making these characters and their decisions feel so real, and I wanted to make a video as an excuse to talk about this incredible show in more depth. And I've decided to do so by creating a ranking of each season, where I'll discuss my favourite elements of each stage of the show. Although, in actuality, this video is just me seizing the chance to praise Better Call Saul's perfect narrative progression and storytelling. Because this video is a ranking, it means that something has to go at the bottom. This in no way speaks to a lack of quality compared to the seasons above it. In fact, the show as a whole is just so good that even my lowest ranked season is still better than most new films or TV shows. Every season of Better Call Saul is just marvellous, which made this so hard to rank, and it's obviously just my personal opinion and not even remotely objective, so I'd love to hear your rankings in the comments. So I can speak as freely as possible about the show, I'll be discussing some spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, I would recommend not watching the video so that you can stay as spoiler free as possible. I can't recommend taking the incredible journey through both shows enough, and even if you already have, I can only urge you to rewatch them again to pick up on the finer nuances and gain a different perspective on Vince Gilligan and Peter Gold's sprawling crime saga. With that being said, let's start with number 6. As already stated, something has to go at the bottom of the list. For me, that is Season 3 of Better Call Saul. I must reiterate, as with every season of this show, Season 3 is still an absolutely phenomenal season of television. It has everything that makes a show special and more. The only thing that puts this slightly lower for me than the rest of the show is the first 3 or so episodes. I can't stress enough, these episodes are still excellent, just not quite as riveting as the general bulk of the show, at least not for me. It's also this stretch of the show that we're reintroduced to Gus, and outside of giving us a few cool Detective Mike scenes, the build up to meeting Gus again has never really done much for me. I think that's purely because it's already obvious that he's the one tracking Mike, and it doesn't do much in that time to add much to the characters, meaning that, on rewatches especially, it feels a bit like killing time until we can finally see him. From episode 4 onwards, however, it quickly rectifies any issues I had with the prior 3 episodes. I think because season 2 ended on such an intense dramatic note for the interpersonal relationships within the show, it struggles to maintain that bite for the first 3 episodes. But the closer we get to Chicanery, the 5th episode of the season, and one of the best of the entire show, it really ramps up in excitement. The drawn out structure of the episodes before it retroactively works so well to really make the impact of Chicanery feel as sharp as possible. Leaving 5 episodes between the season 2 finale's cliffhanger and finally seeing its true consequences was definitely a smart choice, and it makes that episode much weightier once we get to it. I just wish that the padding in that time before Chicanery had a little more going on. As for the second half of season 3, it feels like a calm after the storm that was Chuck's mental breakdown in Chicanery, and I love this segment of the season so much. I absolutely adore seeing Jimmy do community service and generally just doing what he can to make money during his year of disbarment. It's such a good opportunity to have more slipping Jimmy hijinks, which are some of my favourite parts of the show. We also get to see plenty of the film crew as Jimmy decides he wants to do freelance advertising. The film crew are some of my favourite side characters, and it's always a good episode when they show up. So getting plenty of them in season 3's second half is everything I could ever want. A lot of the praise for this show goes towards a darker, more dramatic overarching story, but I think it absolutely excels in its lower stakes, and I think moments like these show that off perfectly. As for the cartel side of things, I'm of the opinion that it's usually the weaker side of the show compared to the lawyer stuff, at least in the first 3 seasons. There's a point in season 4 where the crime element becomes significantly more compelling, but I'll talk about that when we get to season 4. Although, for this season, I will say that I absolutely love everything to do with Nacho. This is where he goes from a good character to a great one. With him being so clearly victimised from here onwards, he's very easy to connect to and adds some layers of humanity to the cartel plot. The build up to him swapping out Hector's pills is super intense, even though we already know that it works out because of Hector's condition in Breaking Bad. But finally seeing Hector collapse is still immensely satisfying, especially after getting to see even more of just how much of a prick he is before his paralysis. Season 3 is an incredible season of television. It only goes at the bottom of the list just because of how good everything else is. I previously mentioned that Better Call Saul is just as good at pulling off lower stakes as it is at some of its more serious storylines, and I believe that Season 1 is the absolute pinnacle of that sentiment. Season 1 is so underrated to me, and I think that it still somewhat exists in a shadow of Breaking Bad. Everything is so simplistic here, and there's an element of bliss to seeing that upon further rewatches, knowing how grim everything gets the further the show goes on. Lower stakes means more room to set up the fundamentals of the show in a relaxed yet super controlled way. I haven't seen many shows that so eloquently and almost effortlessly just throw us into its world and are able to make it so instantly enticing. So many fantastic new characters are added to the Breaking Bad universe roster. Howard, Chuck and Nacho are all great characters from the word go. Most importantly, this is our introduction to Kim Wexler, one of my favourite fictional characters of all time. The reintroduction of Jimmy, before he called himself Saul, and Mike is also wonderfully executed, showing us two characters we're already familiar with in a completely new light, and in significantly different places in their lives when we catch up with them in Breaking Bad. Mike especially changed in my eyes massively within just a few episodes. I never loved him in Breaking Bad like a lot of other people, but he really gets his time to shine in this show. His backstory in the episode 5-0 is gut-wrenching, and his monologue at the end of the episode gets me choked up every single time.
I broke my boy.
It feels strange to have Season 1 so low compared to the other seasons, and it is in fact one of the most consistent seasons in terms of quality in my opinion. I think what places this lower than much of what comes after is that it doesn't quite have as many immense highs as the seasons that follow. My review of Season 2 is very similar to how I feel about Season 1. It's similarly low stakes and it's a magnificent chapter in the Better Call Saul saga because of it, except in Season 2, the vision feels much more refined and the filmmaking more competent. If the show hadn't already found its groove in the first season, it certainly has here. I think Season 2 is a good chance to talk about how good the editing and music supervision is in this show. There are just so many montages that are insanely fun to watch, because Skip McDonald is just allowed to go completely off on the editing timeline, and there's always an absolute banger playing over the top. This show has introduced me to so many cool songs that have since become favourites of mine. I adore the inflatable montage of Jimmy trying to get himself fired from Davison, Maine, as well as the montage of Kim calling old contacts to try and find work, all set to a Spanish cover of My Way, which wouldn't be the last time we hear a cover of a Frank Sinatra song in the show. This season also holds quite a special place in the timeline, because it feels like the last gasp for what I'd call the fun era of the show. It's the end of the low stakes I've mentioned multiple times, and makes way for Season 3, where the seeds of drama that were planted over the preliminary seasons begin to flourish. Coming in at number 3 is Season 4. When Season 3's immensely shocking ending occurred, which saw Chuck intentionally burning his house down with himself inside, it feels as though a line is drawn, and it firmly and boldly marks the exact halfway point of the series. From there, the second half of the show is much darker and much more frequently. The fallout of Chuck's death is superbly handled and births some of the most complex character work of the series, as we see Jimmy's growing disillusionment from and resentment towards his brother post-mortem. The whole show is so unique in its view of perspective. To what extent do we validate Jimmy's actions just because he is our point of view character? I have different views of Jimmy and Chuck's relationship as well as their actions as a result of it on each viewing, and it's absolutely incredible to me that a show can do that. After my first watch, I was surprised to hear quite how many people hated Chuck, some even going as far as to call him an antagonist for the first half of the show. I was very neutral on my view of their relationship the first time around, and I found myself completely understanding both sides. On a second watch, I felt more confident that Chuck was right about Jimmy, but went about his issues the wrong way, and pushed Jimmy even further into his bad traits by not believing in him. Yet this time watching the show, I found Chuck more relentless and vile in his inability to let go of his vendetta. The show's subjective portrayal of this relationship is fantastic, and allows the audience to project whatever they'd like onto it, reaching their own conclusions. And I feel as though the inability to truly know what to make of Chuck also becomes a part of Jimmy's character, as he reflects on his relationship with his brother after his death, understandably feeling more burnt by Chuck's actions against him, but also deep down knowing he was arguably similarly complicit in the volatility of their dynamic. This mix of emotions and feelings are telegraphed entirely implicitly, and only come out in Bob Odenkirk's acting, as well as Jimmy's actions following the absence of his brother. The show really makes a case that Saul Goodman is a concoction of Jimmy's pent-up anger at his brother, as well as the buried guilt surrounding his death that he's too insecure to face head-on. Is it nature or nurture? There's no denying that Jimmy is and always was fundamentally different to Chuck. But was it Chuck's constant dismissal of him that stunted his maturity? And was it that which forced Jimmy into the character that Chuck had projected onto him? It's really powerful and thought-provoking stuff, and the bulk of it is all in Chuck's absence, the best time to really analyse what Chuck meant to Jimmy, and how things could have been different had their relationship been less sour. Outside of that, Season 4 gives us a famous Something Stupid montage in the episode of the same name. This incredible sequence not only boasts an absolutely beautiful cover of the Frank and Nancy Sinatra classic, but does so much with its simple concept. The split screen shows us everything without saying a word. It's impressive how this montage is used to cover 9 months without being jarring. The way it foreshadows the rift between Jimmy and Kim is astonishing, showing their daily lives become more and more separate. The love story between the two is one of the most important things in the show, and this montage is an incredibly significant milestone in their relationship timeline. The final shot of this sequence, showing Kim's side of the split screen fade away, fills me with sadness every time. On a first watch, it's unclear if this is an allusion towards her eventual death, which would have explained her absence from Breaking Bad. But after seeing how their relationship actually pans out by the end of the show, this moment is perhaps even more impactful and emotionally complex. The last few episodes of Season 4 are really what cement it as an incredible season though. Kushata has one of the funniest schemes, with Jimmy and Kim attempting to save Huel with the help of the film crew. And the end of the very same episode marking the point at which the cartel plot shifts into high gear and truly meets the quality of the main plot. This is of course because of the introduction of the one and only Lalo Salamanca. Since he is such a late addition to this season, I'll talk about him more extensively in Season 5. The episode after is Vida saying, which I wanted to mention because of this scene of Jimmy and Kim's argument, which demonstrates the best acting in the show to this point. Bob Odenkirk's delivery is so heartbreaking, and he perfectly portrays a sense of desperation to appear unfazed by Chuck's death with this line.
Yeah, I don't think about Chuck, okay? I don't miss Chuck. Chuck was alive and now he's dead, and that's that. Finito. Life goes on, so sue me.
And Rhea Seehorn's later line delivery as a rebuttal to Jimmy also gives me chills every time.
There you go. Kick a man when he's down.
Jimmy, you are always down.
And of course, Winner, the season finale, one of my absolute favourite episodes of the show, and maybe my favourite to that point. We get even more fleshing out of Jimmy and Chuck's relationship with a flashback showing a rare moment of bliss in their relationship. On the cartel side of things, the construction of the meth lab in this season also builds up to a truly devastating moment in this finale, where Mike is told he must kill Werner Ziegler, a massive turning point in Mike's character and sense of morality. Jonathan Banks' voice wavering as he practically tells Werner he is about to die only gets more upsetting each time I watch the episode, and the iconic shot of the execution itself is simply breathtaking. And the final scene of the season just sends a shiver up my spine. Jimmy finally makes his transformation into Saul Goodman, something you are waiting for from the beginning of the show, yet when it comes, there's a depressive weight that suddenly falls upon the viewer, as the reality and symbolism of this name change sets in.
DBA, because I'm not going to be practicing under the name McGill, so.
Shouldn't be a problem. Just down the hall, we have all the forms.
Great.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.
Season 5 of Better Call Saul is a true beginning of the end. Saul Goodman has arrived and is slowly corrupting the purer heart of Jimmy McGill, fulfilling the prophecy that Chuck had laid out for him. And to make matters worse, Lalo is here to stay. The primary plot with Jimmy, Kim and all the lawyer stuff definitively converges with the cartel plot, and the merging of these two worlds is seamless. They blend together so naturally, and the drama that comes from it is absolutely perfect. I credit that in large part to one of the shining stars of the show, Lalo, the King, Salamanca. Tony Dalton's performance is like nothing I've ever seen. He's a perfect middleman to connect both plotlines, because despite his sadistic intentions, his genuine and effortless charm makes him a perfect on-screen companion to Bob Odenkirk. And his smiley persona is so unique in the sense that it seems genuine. His beaming grin doesn't seem like a cover for the evil under the surface. Instead, his commanding presence actually comes from how completely comfortable and in control he seems in every situation he finds himself in. Much of his menace also stems from the inability to truly read him. It's hard to ever know what he's really thinking or planning, as he seems to primarily act based on instinct. There's a fantastic YouTube video that perfectly encapsulates how superbly written and performed Lalo's character is, so for more elaboration I would highly recommend giving it a watch. Season 5 also contains the first true appearance of Sleeping Kimmy, which is just so upsetting to see play out. On my first watch I didn't expect Kim to be roped in and enticed by Jimmy's ways, never mind to the extent we see here, and especially in Season 6. Every single episode in this season feels like it holds insurmountable significance, yet never loses the essential element of fun that characterised the earlier seasons of the show. We still get the typically energetic montages that allow for an escape towards levity in the midst of the coming sense of dread. It's definitely worth mentioning that at this point, the show has never looked more beautiful. The framing is even more experimental and potent with its thematic meaning, and the contrast feels much richer, allowing the colours to pop and stand out against the darker textures within each frame. The tension really escalates in the final few episodes of the season. Bagman plunges Jimmy into the criminal underworld once and for all, in a harrowing, intense display of cinematic excellence. And Bad Choice Road, which also contains an incredible callback to the Something Stupid montage, puts Kim in the crosshairs more than ever, making me fear for her life, even knowing her fate upon rewatches. Everything is put perfectly in place for the show's home stretch. Speaking of which, what else was ever going to take the top spot? It's rare for a show's final season to be unequivocally and harmoniously heralded as the best by its entire fanbase, but Season 6 of Better Call Saul met fan expectations and still found ways to give us things we didn't even know we wanted. Right from the start, you know you're getting into one of the best seasons of television ever made with a superb cold open of Wine and Roses. The premiere episode gets its name from this cold open, which utilises an instrumental version of The Days of Wine and Roses by Jackie Gleason to perfection. This extended sequence showcases a glimpse into a post-Breaking Bad future and moves around Saul Goodman's house as the federal government tear it apart after his involvement with Walter White's meth empire. We witness the seizure of all of his possessions, including many relics from the days before Saul Goodman. This scene is not just one of my favourites in the show, but one of my favourite sequences ever to be captured on film. It's a real reminder that we're plummeting towards the end of the journey, as loose ends are beginning to be tied up, and that will soon come full circle to eventually seeing Jimmy's transformation into the man we see in Breaking Bad. This sequence feels like we're watching a fallen empire. Jimmy is gone, and now Saul Goodman has too. Everything he built for himself is slipping away, and now in Omaha under the name Gene, his life is a shell of what it once was. The scene is mellow and very depressing, as we see the remnants of a life built on insecurity and a subconscious longing for the innocence of the past and lost love, as is evident from the objects that Saul kept as reminders of the good old days. The final shot of the Safiro and Yeho bottle top falling out of a desk is a final gut punch. It is a symbol of Jimmy and Kim's relationship, a bond formed on the fun they had together and their shared sense of belittlement directed towards them from those with a perceived higher power. The joy they got from biting back at the people who made them feel small is what led to this, and the dissolution of their romance was the final push that turned Jimmy all the way into Saul. And it's all gone, and now so is the fortress that Saul put up as an attempt to mask the pain of the past. This is just a wonderful sequence, and the song choice is equal parts beautiful and bleak. It's a perfect start to the final stage of this journey, and preps the audience perfectly for the meticulously crafted season of television that lies ahead. It's moments like these that truly reinforce what makes Better Call Saul such a good prequel. We know generally what happens after the events of this show, and the joy in seeing what leads to that lies within the audience's omniscience over the characters. By knowing what will happen in the future, we are constantly reminded of the consequences of the characters' actions, making them more impactful to see actually play out. It may seem like a strange comparison, but it can be equated to the Clone Wars. Similarly to Better Call Saul, the audience has the benefit of knowledge surrounding the darkness ahead, and knowing that adds entire new dimensions to the emotional weight behind the time spent leading up to such a tragedy. It enhances a sense of inevitability of finality, and also leaves plenty of room for surprises in the meantime that further flesh out the future events that we're already aware of. I can't talk about this season without mentioning the directorial debut of Reyes Sehorn with the episode Hit and Run, which I believe to be one of, if not the most underrated episode of the entire series. This season also has one of the best 3-episode stretches in television history, with episodes 7 through 9. Plan and execution, point and shoot, and fun and games. This is the swan song for the main timeline of the show, as the final 4 episodes take place in the Gene timeline in black and white, and chronologically speaking, Breaking Bad takes place between both timelines. They really couldn't have handled the connective tissue between timelines better than they do in these episodes. They're frequently intense, emotional, and feel truly monumental. Plan and execution ends in the most shocking moment I've ever witnessed on television, with Howard being unceremoniously murdered by Lalo for no other reason than simply because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's been over 2 years and I'm still not over it. Point and Shoot is maybe the most grim episode of the entire show, which makes sense given the violent cliffhanger of the episode before it. It's dark, gritty, and leaves me feeling empty every single time I watch or even think about it. It's also this episode that contains what is in my opinion the most gut-wrenching moment of the show. It's a scene where, after Lalo has finally been taken down by Gus, he's buried alongside Howard. But their final resting place isn't just any hole in the ground. Instead, they are buried beneath the meth lab, meaning that during the entirety of Breaking Bad, Howard was directly beneath Walter and Jesse's feet, right there with the man who killed him. All the while, the residents of Albuquerque are none the wiser, believing that Howard drowned himself at sea, and died a drug addict due to the smear campaign that was sickeningly orchestrated by Jimmy and Kim. Mike's somber final glance at the makeshift grave speaks 1,000 words, and only becomes more depressing when you realise that Mike would have known Howard from back when he worked at the toll booth outside the courthouse. Symbolically, this is even more significant than many may realise. I see it as a metaphorical representation of the fact that the foundations of Breaking Bad are figuratively, and now literally, built upon the tragedy that is Better Call Saul. Following that episode up is Fun and Games, the final episode of the main timeline before finally catching up to Gene in Omaha. It opens with another montage that joins the one from Wine and Roses as one of the best scenes I have ever witnessed, as it shows Jimmy and Kim going about their lives the day after Howard's death, where they have to pretend as though it never happened. This montage is perfect, plain and simple. It's so solemn, and the dourness of the visuals on screen are perfectly contrasted against a somewhat more serene song that plays over the top of it. The cuts between Jimmy and Kim's days at work and Mike's crew getting rid of all traces of the previous night's disaster are genius, and it ends with Jimmy and Kim returning home to a spotless apartment, as though nothing ever happened, and the acting is brilliant here. Both actors perfectly convey the realisation that their actions led to the death and spoiled legacy of an innocent man, and that the weight of that burden will be something they carry for the rest of their lives, all shown without a single word spoken, heightening the devastation of Kim's eventual decision to leave Jimmy at the end of the episode, the final nail in the coffin of Jimmy McGill. After finally reaching the black and white timeline, I'll never forget the pure shock and hollowness I felt seeing the intro become so distorted that it cuts out for the first time. That feeling of emptiness is maintained throughout practically the entirety of the final 4 episodes. It's so rare for a show to stick the landing quite like this show does, and I maintain that the series finale is a perfect episode, and maybe my favourite of the entire show. Season 6 acts as a summary of everything I love about Better Call Saul. It has all my favourite aspects of the seasons before it and conveys them better than ever. The directing, acting, writing, cinematography and editing are all the best we've ever seen them. To summarise, this show's final season is what cements Better Call Saul as one of the most refined and inventive pieces of filmmaking I've ever seen. When looking at the show as a whole, I would have to call Better Call Saul perfect. It doesn't miss a beat. Every plot point is maximised in its effectiveness and dramatic power. Not many pieces of media have such a tight hold on me like this does, where I'm constantly left thinking about it for weeks after I finish another rewatch. Due to the recurrent motif of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine in Season 6, I saw the show through an entirely different lens on this rewatch. It can be seen thematically as a time travel show. In the final episode, we see numerous flashbacks to Jimmy asking people about what they would do differently if they had a time machine. And because Jimmy never gives an honest answer, I found myself going deep into thought about what moment in this character's life are the most consequential in the grand scheme of things. And whilst doing that, it made me notice that on this entire viewing, I had constantly been questioning how the smallest elements of the show might have drastically altered the sequence of events that take place over the course of the Breaking Bad universe. The show is a perfect analysis of the butterfly effect, and left me questioning the idea of responsibility for actions. What could Jimmy have done differently? Or do the terrible things that happen to him and those that he loves stem from events outside of his control? If you go back to the very first episode, you could even argue that had the skateboarders not picked Jimmy's car for a scheme, none of the eventual tragedy would have unfolded. Jimmy wouldn't have picked on them to get back at the Kettlemans, they wouldn't have got the wrong car, and Jimmy wouldn't have met Tuco or Nacho, meaning that Jimmy's world wouldn't have collided with the likes of Lalo further down the line. There are so many moments that can be seen through this cause and effect lens, and it's exactly what makes the show such an incredible prequel. As I already stated earlier in the video, knowing what happens in the future adds retrospective weight to the choices made in the present, and that is true to life as well. A constant thrust towards our futures is often what rules our lives, and plummets most into existential dread. Existentialism that Better Call Saul captures perfectly. It puts this show so high in my estimation because there is an inherent emotional connection that I think just about anybody can relate to in some way. It's a blessing that this show exists, and that it gives audiences such extensive food for thought. I can only imagine that people will be discussing this masterpiece for years to come, sparking conversations that delve into different perspectives on its meanings and symbolism, as all art should be. And that's what Better Call Saul is. Art.